Even when I was young, I had a tendency to read everything that I could about essentially the mysteries of life. I was really drawn to work from the East. And when I moved back from Tennessee to North Carolina when I was around 25, 26 years old, there was this one particular bookstore that I would go to try to find the stuff that I was interested in. I walked in one day and the clerk behind the counter acknowledged me, called me by name actually, although I didn't know her, and asked me if I needed any help. And I said, no, I said, I'm fine. And I was standing back there back in those days, it was called the Psychology and Religion. And I was back there looking around, and all of a sudden I realized that something was wrong. And I turn, and the clerk is standing literally right in front of me with this kind of look of upset on her face. And out of the blue, all of a sudden, she started sobbing and just fell into my arms. It was really alarming for me. I thought, my God, what have I done? And I said, are you okay? Do you want me to call someone? It was a little scary because I didn't know what was happening. Is she having a heart attack? And then all of a sudden she spoke and explained to me. She said, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to get upset. I was on my way back just to tell you about this one book that I thought you might be interested in, because I see what it is that you read. And all of a sudden it overcame me. And I asked her, I said, what overcame you? And she said, today is the anniversary of my daughter's suicide. And all of a sudden, in walking back towards you, it was more than I could bear. And so we started talking, and she explained that had it not been for this one particular book, that she would not have been able to make it through. And so she told me the name of the book, asked me if I knew about it, and I said, no. I said, I haven't heard of that book. I said, and I've heard of everything. And she kind of started laughing at me in a way, smiled, and said, well, apparently not, because you don't know about this book. And one of the things that she said to me was, Mr. Hasty, be careful about reading this book because it will transform your life. And I said, well, I'm up for that. And so I ordered my first book. And I remember the day I went to pick it up. I was on my way home, and I couldn't stand it. I pulled the car off the side of the road and took the wrapping off and was kind of thumbing through the first couple of pages. And all of a sudden, I read these 3 lines that was in the introduction. And the next thing I knew, my head was on the steering wheel, and I was just sobbing because I knew that it was true, what I just read. And some texts are that powerful, it's almost as though they represent instant realization. And this was one of my first steps into realizing that spiritual truth is that way. It is instantaneously transformational through spiritual realization.
Welcome to Becoming You, the Path to Consciousness, where we apply spiritual wisdom and truth to your everyday life. I'm Terry Hasty.
And I'm Haydn Hasty.
If this is your first time joining us, we want to let you know that we don't talk about politics or personalities, but we are committed to helping build the bridge between what is happening all over the world, this process of dissolving and being destroyed, and then what is being created. If you have been with us before, thank you so much for joining us again and for being part of building a more conscious world together. And I hope you'll consider participating in our private online project. You can find information for that at becomingyoujourney.com. And we'd also love to meet you in person at the Omega Institute, where we will be teaching a workshop on consciousness July 31st through August 2nd. And you can find out more about that at our website, truthspringasheville.com.
In the first episode of the Cliff Notes for Getting Out of the Box, we spoke a lot about how to get from here essentially to there, but we also brought up the very important question of, okay, if that's true and that's what I'm supposed to be doing, then where are the answers to my life? And how does my life work? And that's what we're going to do in this episode.
We're also going to share with you what was introduced to us that changed really everything, even though we've spent 30 years working with groups and individuals around more what we would say self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and so forth. But it's also what we continue to study today. And it's not that there's just one way, because every soul is given its way home. No one is left out, and each individual is such a special manifestation in the universe. Therefore, your path must be absolutely a unique path, but we wanted to share this very significant part of our path because we believe and hope that it would be of value to you. But before we dive in, Haydn, I just want to share that I ran into someone who's listening to our podcast, so she was sharing with me some feedback around that. She's also attended courses and conferences with us, and so she's comfortable giving feedback, and she asked a really profound question. It got me thinking as we were talking about it, that if any of you listening to the podcast, if you have a question or a comment you'd like to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can email Haydn or me, and our emails are basically the same. Haydn is Hayd, and it's just 5 letters. There's no E. Haydn at helpingyougrow.com, or mine is Terry, Terry, at helpingyougrow.com, and we would love to hear from you.
Before we begin to talk about this, I want to share a few things about my own journey, not because I want to talk about myself, but because of the path that has taken me so long to be able to get to this place of understanding this issue of spiritual truth. I've worked with 3 teachers over the course of my life, and it was almost as though I would be able to look back and see this very distinct pattern of moving from being introduced to self-awareness and then into what I refer to as the cosmic, and then into the issue of the transcendent. And it took each one of those teachers to kind of prepare me and get me ready. It's almost as though it was a prerequisite to get me ready to be able to hear and understand what my third teacher said.
It's really like the story Gilgamesh, the original human story. It says once the epic hero starts on the path of discovery, the teachers will appear, the guides will appear, and that's what you were just describing. In the right order, even. That's
exactly what happened to me. It was in 1992 that my second teacher, Nancy Willis, introduced me to a man whose name was Robert Wilkinson. I was going through a death process in my life. I had gotten divorced, left my job, filed a lawsuit for the custody of my children, lost that lawsuit, and was really just in a real and darkened and devastated place in my life. And then I arranged this meeting as advised by Nancy to meet with Robert. And he was supposed to show up at the apartment I was living in around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe it was 2 o'clock, I don't really remember. But he didn't show up. And I thought, well, this is so stupid on my part. I haven't even met this guy, and here I am arranging this meeting. So a little bit of time passed by, and I think it was closer to 4:30, 5 o'clock. There was a knock on the door, and I go to the door, and this guy is standing there, and I said something like, yes, can I help you? He said...
Was he smiling?
Yes, had that big smile on his face. And he said, I'm looking for Haydn Hasty. And I said, I'm Haydn. And he puts his hand out. And he said, "It's so nice to meet you. My name is Robert Wilkinson." Prior to the meeting, I had sent Robert my birth information. I was told that he was an astrologer and a cosmologist. And we're standing in the door, and I literally took my right hand and put it on the inside of the door because I wasn't going to let him in because, he's an hour and a half late. And so I looked at him and I said, I have to be honest, I thought our meeting was at 3 o'clock, and he's just still smiling at me. And he looks at me, he says, "It was." And I'm like, okay, this guy's crazy, And he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out this piece of paper and he just kind of gently just puts it in front of me. And he says, "Are you aware that you gave me the wrong directions to where you live?" And I looked at it and I said, "Oh my God," I said, "this is the apartment that I used to live in." And he looked at me and smiled and he said, "It's true, isn't it, Haydn? You don't know where you are." And I looked at him and smiled and said, "Come on in." And the rest, the next couple of hours was mind-blowing. And that was going to open up for me a very intense relationship with Robert that I would seek out years later, who would show me where the answers were and why I had not found them in my life.
Hayden, you talked about the progression of things, and one of the early resources that we both used, but you were ahead of me, of course, on this one, and you read A Course in Miracles, and that's the book that you were speaking about, going into the bookstore, and the woman said her daughter had committed suicide the year before, and this was the book that got her through it. What are the first 3 lines? I know what they are, but I love the way you say them.
Well, there's no difference in the way I say them and the way you say them. It was kind of thumbing through right there in the introduction and the prologue, and all of a sudden at the bottom of one page of the book called A Course in Miracles were 3 lines, and the 3 lines read, "Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God." And I just collapsed because I knew, as soon as I read it, I knew it was true, that nothing real can be threatened and nothing unreal exists. So, the phrase was extremely simple, but anybody can apply that to their life.
I think it does help to apply it to a real life example. So if you're okay with it, I just thought of one that we could share here. It's that maybe a lot of people could identify with at some point in time. And it's because it sounds beautiful, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. But let's kind of run this situation through that filter, or through that equation. Thank you. So a friend of mine was dealing with the loss of her job, and who hasn't been there? And she understood the rationale of why she was let go. They were saving a lot of money. They were outsourcing her role. Everyone was doing that kind of thing. And she ended on good terms with her organization. They said, they would write glowing references for her. And she thought surely she'd get a new opportunity. I mean, that's change isn't always bad. She'd have a new adventure. It's kind of time for a change. But as the months dragged on and she was getting less and less positive about it, and the idea of not having a job was feeling extremely real. And we say nothing real can be threatened. Not having a job can feel very threatening. And she was networking. It was during COVID, so she took a lot of online classes. And I think being during, the COVID period made it a little more challenging too. But she was getting really frustrated. And in spite of that, I remember she was asking for feedback and input. She was trying to improve her resume, but still the clock was ticking, and she had a few potential things that kind of petered out. And as the mortgage payments and all the other bills kept coming in, and she was getting more and more stressed out, even though the bank, I remember, helped her out, I was really impressed with that, and suspended her mortgage payments. She still, for over a year, didn't have any income. And she reached out to Robert Wilkinson, who had brought us to this new wisdom that we're going to share in our Cliff's Notes from today. And he told her, You will not get a job until you have learned what you need to learn from not having a job. And when she told me that, she said almost immediately after it, she said, that thought has crossed my mind. We do have a knowing, but when the reality feels like I don't have a job and I need one, it's hard to hear that other voice. The truth is not that far away from us. It just gets
veiled.
Yeah, covered up, and the anxiety and stress of everyday life can make it really hard to hear that other voice. And I wanted to share this quote that the mother wrote, and we'll talk some more about who the mother is in a minute. She said, "At times you've made fine plans, and if you had succeeded, you would have been more and more encrusted in your outer ignorance, your stupid little ambition, and your aimless activity. Whilst if you receive a good shock and the post you coveted is denied to you, the plan you made is shattered, and you find yourself completely thwarted, then sometimes this opposition opens to you a door to something truer and deeper." And so when we think about Course in Miracles, nothing real can be threatened. The real part is the truer and deeper.
Well, there are some truths, and that statement, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists, is an example of a truth. If it was the only thing an individual learned to live their life out of, their life would become a transformational path toward the realization of their potential. Because if you take a very close look at it, and the object is to figure out how to apply spiritual wisdom in your life, take the first two sentences, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. And you put those in brackets, and on, say, the left-hand side of the bracket, if you take something upsetting, like being depressed, being ashamed, being afraid, and you run it through that formula, then the question that has to be asked is that fear, is that shame, is that depression real? Well, in the mind it's real, but not according to spiritual truth, because nothing real can be threatened. So it doesn't take much, although the mind will just resist it, where you're able to see it's not real. But it is something that I'm experiencing. It's something that my mind is producing, but it is not real because you feel threatened. But nothing unreal exists. It's a transformational result that occurs from spiritual realization. At this point in my life and work, my main focus has really begun to center around three individuals as a result of my work with Robert Wilkinson. And Robert passed away, about 4 years ago? Is it 5 now?
It's 5.
5 years. And it was because of him that my path took an immediate turn towards this other that we are attempting to share and teach in our work together. And those three individuals that I now focus all of my work and effort on are Patrizia Norelli Bachelet, who was Robert Wilkinson's teacher, Sri Aurobindo, who is considered the greatest sage that India has ever produced, and a woman, she was actually born French in Paris. Her name is Mira Alfassa Richard, who would become known as the Mother. And the Mother was Sri Aurobindo's principal spiritual collaborator. Now, we don't have time to go into really what would take a week just to discuss the background of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, but to give a few little tidbits about who these three people are, in particular who Sri Aurobindo and the Mother are.
And sometimes people will hear about Sri Aurobindo because yoga teachers like to use quotes from Sri Aurobindo, or they may have encountered some of his work before. And I think that's wonderful, but we're looking at it not only we could never read the totality of his work. He spent 27 years, I think, in isolation just writing. But it's how do we apply this to our life? How do we apply the wisdom that he shared?
And the application to me is what results in a lived experience of that truth. And that's the difference between quoting somebody and actually living it out and having the courage to get your mind basically to subordinate itself to that truth. Sri Aurobindo was born in 1872. He died in 1950. He was actually educated in Cambridge, but he was first known as really a radical leader in the Indian independence movement, was imprisoned by the British in 1908, where he had a series of profound spiritual realizations that shifted his focus from politics to what he would soon call the supramental manifestation, or the divinization or spiritualization of the earth, of the planet. In 1926, he withdrew into seclusion, where he would spend the rest of his life producing this massive amount of work that centered on what he referred to as the integral yoga, and as I said, what he referred to as the supramental manifestation, or the descent of the spiritual into the physical. And there were two major pieces that he produced. Savitri is considered to be his masterpiece, and another work which was just as masterful was a book called The Life Divine. It took me 2 years. Robert introduced me to Savitri, and it took me 2 years to read Savitri. And the night that I opened up the book, my life was transformed. I remember I was sitting there. It's a very thick book. It's an 800-page epic poem. And so here I go. I'm so excited to get started on this. And I read the first line of this poem, and the line read, "It was the hour before the gods awake," not awoke, but awake. And I intuitively knew that this is the beginning of time, the awakening of consciousness in the physical world. And I also knew that it was analogous to the birth of the individual from the womb into the physical. And I just started crying, because I knew at last, here it is, everything that I had ever been looking for. And I couldn't put the book down. I took it with me everywhere I went. It took me really just about the same amount of time to read it the second time. And, as you know, I keep my copy of Savitri, on the bedstand.
It's whenever, so Haydn would read quotes to me from the book, from his desk. Our offices are right beside each other. He'd say, "Hey, listen to this one." He'd read it, or when we were in bed, he'd read it. And it's challenging to have somebody, or for me anyway, to have read to me in the middle of something that he's very involved in. And so I got my own copy of Savitri and read it. And I don't know, when we say it's an 800-page epic poem, how many people are going to rush out and get a copy. But it is something that we're sharing with you, because for each of us, it's such a powerful book about the beauty of life, the magnificence of the human experience.
All of the answers.
And I don't know where else you would find that, where I just felt, even in Course in Miracles, which changed my life too. But in this book, it was like everything I read was like, yes, this is true. But it's hard to share. It's hard to share those kind of realizations with another person. And so that's why we don't sit here and just read Savitri to you as much as we would like to, because it's such a beautiful text.
Well, on our YouTube channel, it's going to take about another 2 to 3 weeks. But I've got about 60 of those files that I'm loading up there where I do read Savitri, because all of the answers to your life are there. Now, if I go back just a minute, I remember back when I first came across A Course in Miracles, and I really did believe at that time, that was around the early 80s. A Course in Miracles was published in 1977. It's over 3 million copies have been sold. I think it's been printed in like 12, 13 different languages. I mean, I thought this is the mountaintop, only to find out later through my work with Robert that, that there was something beyond that. Yeah. It was an incredible bridge, and there's so much to say about A Course in Miracles. But as I've shared with Terry many times, that, when it comes my time to die, I want her hand in mine, and I want my copy of Savitri in my other hand. That's how important it would become. In fact, I would say if you only read one book for the rest of your life, this book is it. Now, if the question is, where are the answers to my life? I'm saying unequivocally, definitively, they're right here in this book. But then again, who gets up in the morning and is a real student of their life? Who is it that is really interested in mastering the process of becoming who you are? Who do you know that regularly devotes their time to that inner journey? Not many, but that is the game that is changing in our world today. We are beginning the movement of this inner journey to the truth of who we are and what we're doing here. So I would say, if the only thing you did was to read one page a day, but don't just read, underline, circle, highlight, study. The reason that it will change your life, even when you don't understand everything that you're reading, is because Savitri is the language and the journey of the soul. And there's so much that I could say about it. I wish that was really the purpose of the rest of my life, to sit around and talk about Savitri. That's how important it became for me. And I've known people who said they tried to read it but didn't understand some things, so they gave up. Don't give up. Such are the workings of the mind. But when your higher being seeks this higher wisdom that it is starved for, it's like something is ignited. It's like something inside of you. When you read that one sentence, you go, oh my God, that's true. So as I said, Sri Aurobindo is considered to be India's greatest sage. And in fact, he is considered in many circles to have been an avatar. The mother considered him to be the ninth and last avatar in the Hindu lineage. But his work, without exception, is the blueprint of human evolution. And with that in mind, I will read this quote from The Life Divine. This is a Sri Aurobindo quote. A divine life in the manifestation is then not only possible as the high result in ransom of our present life in the ignorance, which is where we are today. But if these things are as we have seen them, it is the inevitable outcome and consummation of nature's evolutionary endeavor. The awakening and the becoming and the realization of the truth of who you are is real.
Now, the mother who we've mentioned, and she was the spiritual collaborator of Sri Aurobindo, and there's an interesting story there, but that's for another time as well. She was born in Paris, as Haydn said. Her name was Mira Alfassa. She was an artist, a musician, a spiritual seeker, even as a child, and she met Sri Aurobindo in Pondicherry. She and her husband actually went there, I believe, in 1914, and she recognized him as someone she had been seeing in her dreams for years, and so she realized she was supposed to be working with him. And after he went into seclusion to focus on his own work, he entrusted her with the organization of the Sri Aurobindo ashram, and so they were very closely connected, even though they worked independently. Sri Aurobindo said that she was the embodiment of the Divine Mother, the dynamic, creative energy of the universe. And he also considered her to be the most conscious person on the planet. I'd like to have that classification one day. Maybe in the top 10%. That would be great.
That'd be a pretty nice certificate to be given.
So she lived a very long life and had wonderful impact. And I love, she didn't write, but she spoke, and she had a scribe who traveled with her and wrote what she said. And so
His name was Savitri.
And when you read her, it's very conversational because that's what she was doing. She was speaking with people.
As I've said before, reading the work of the mother reminds me of having a grandmother who would take you to task and not put up with your garbage. It could be confrontational, but it was centered around the truth.
So she founded the City of Dawn in India. It's an international township that's kind of a laboratory for human unity. It's still thriving today. She transformed a really small group of disciples into a huge spiritual community that's focused on.
And the City of Dawn is basically known as Aurobindo.
Yes. Thank you for adding that part. And the agenda, which is a 13-volume record of her later years, it documents her yoga of the cells, where she attempted to bring like the supramental light into the very cells of the human body.
And what is the supramental light? It is the light and truth of God, basically.
And she does have, she talks about the mind, the body, and the emotions, and the spirit. She's definitely, the integral yoga is a lot of what she speaks to. And this kind of brings me, Haydn, to the Cliff's Notes part, because certainly we're not the only ones who love Sri Aurobindo's and the Mother's work, but again, it's not going to be that everyone's going to read it. But it is a blueprint of how you get out of the box, because what they share is the journey of the soul and the tools for it, like the psychic being, that truth of ourselves, the essence of ourselves. So unless the reference point of your life revolves around the transcendent within, your soul, your psychic being,
the higher being,
right,
the higher self,
then we're going to get to the end of our time here and not have quite gotten to the essence or the truth of who and what we are. So Sri Aurobindo and the Mother are excellent resources to help us get to that deeper level. We can get self-awareness a lot of places. We can get peace, as I did with Course in Miracles, in different places. But actually transcending out of just being Terry in this body to recognizing that I am more than that, the eternal, the essence.
See, the part of the way the game has changed is that with the internet, this work is now available to us. I have these incredible discovery processes with AI when I get online and start going into Sri Aurobindo's work, because all of that work is now available to us online, and the Mother's Agenda, which is a massive set of PDF files, because Saprim was the what's the right word?
I said he was the scribe.
He was the scribe. That's the word I'm looking for. He was the Mother's scribe, where he wrote down everything that she spoke about. But I would not say, I understand why you would say they're excellent resources. I don't see it that way. I see this as the definitive understanding of your life, who you are, what you're doing here, what the purpose of your life is. And so it's very important to say here, as we speak about Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, that consciousness picks up where everything else leaves off. And I mean everything. There's going to be the tendency, as we talked about in one of the episodes, in the middle zone, of dragging the old into the new. But consciousness is not like that. It has the mind, the brain is not capable of creating consciousness. But the mind is capable of learning of consciousness, organizing that truth, and then having the courage, as I've said many times before, of aligning itself with, subordinating itself to that truth, and having the courage to live out of it. So I want to be a little confrontational here. I want to be very direct in saying we can talk about this all we want to, but you have to do the work. You have to take the time to discipline yourself, to begin to orient yourself to that inner journey and that understanding of who you are. Is that truth going to be discovered in one lifetime? Absolutely. But you may not like the way that unfolds until you consciously, deliberately begin that journey on your own. So I wanted to share that you have to do the work. And what is the work? The work begins with this inner journey, acknowledging that the physical substance of which you are made contains a spiritual source, making you a spiritual being having a physical experience whose destiny and purpose is unknown to you, but which lies inside of you. So the problem with trying to define the makeup of this source, it's like trying to define God, is the fact that the source, the absolute, the immutable spirit from which you come, is really undefinable. You know, you hear people say all the time, well, God is this. Well, what about that? People will say, well, God is that. Well, what about this? It's like when I hear someone explain that God thinks that being gay is an abomination. Well, in other words, God is this, but he ain't that. But see, the problem is that's not God.
No, that's human duality or
well,
separation.
In other words, if God exists and is the source of all human life, then all there is God. Mm-hmm. No division, only unity, only harmony. But where does this work begin? It begins with the individual. And this is one of the defining characteristics of our future, which is the changes of the world that we seek are not going to be accomplished through the institutions, but through the work of the individual.
Well, and I appreciate what you just shared. The individual, though, is twofold. So we have the person who lost her job and is dealing with that, but then we have her same self is her invisible self, her soul self. Like I have my life as Terry Hasty, but there's also beyond that where I won't be Terry Hasty anymore. You know, it's like after I said we weren't going to share quotes, here's a really great quote from...
but I would ask you this, in saying what you just said, why would we not share that?
Yeah.
Because the quotes of the masters contain the absolute truth of what it is that we're all seeking. So to me, it's perfectly okay.
Yeah, I'm glad. So before I share the quote, though, I'd say, so the Terry Hasty, I have my way of saying things which would be sometimes defensive, sometimes argumentative, sometimes beautiful and loving, you know, sometimes attached to the outcome, or I should say all the time attached to the outcome. But Sri Aurobindo said the difference between that, the physical, and the spiritual, this is the quote, it is the soul in us which turns always towards truth, good, and beauty, because it is by these things that it itself grows in stature. The rest, the opposite of truth, good, and beauty, their opposites are a necessary part of experience, but have to be outgrown in the spiritual increase of the being. And so when you say, well, that's the work, I think that's part of the work, is to recognize I have elements or attractions sometimes to the opposites of truth, good, and beauty, but part of the work is to outgrow those. So the soul gets to enjoy all the experiences, all the aspects of being human, but it's not here just for the experience. Someone told me yesterday, he said, I heard a great hack to feel good about your life. Just stay busy, get involved in hobbies and activities. And I thought, well, there's nothing wrong with that. That's one side.
There is.
But there's the other side, that we're not here just for the experience. And part of the delight of life, of the experiences, is to gain, you know, out of all of the things that happen in our lives. That
we're not here to take it easy.
Right.
That's what being here is about, is growth, expansion. realization.
And part of the beauty of it is finding that secret divine sense and essence and purpose of the experience, even of losing a job, for example, so that by experience, our mind and our life and our soul even grows out of the divisions of the ignorance toward this integrated consciousness and knowledge. So the rest of the quote from Sri Aurobindo is, the growth of the soul is a growth out of darkness into light, out of falsehood into truth, and out of suffering into its own supreme and universal Ananda. And this is why the things we're talking about in
and Ananda being the joy and the bliss of existence.
Right. And so that's why what we're talking about in our podcast, and all the things we teach, are not grasped as easily by the sensory mind as they are by that deeper self, the something in you that tells you you're much more than your mind, your body, and your emotions, that thing that's whispering, kind of going, hey, there's more to you than meets the eye. To me, that's the purpose of experiences, so that we can get to that essence and truly enjoy even the difficulties, to say, but where is this leading? Where is this taking me? What's going to happen next? Rather than, oh my God, when's the next shoe going to fall?
Right. This work, this movement from the horizontal to the vertical, which is the same thing as saying the movement from the physical to the spiritual, that we are advocating is not really about understanding the vast complexities of the infinite and all of the mysteries of the universe, but the mysteries of your life. And it's about making sense and understanding of the purpose of your physical life and why you're here.
My friend who lost her job, when Robert said, you're not going to get another job, he said, don't worry, everything's okay. You're not going to get another job until you've learned what you needed to learn from not having a job. And so instead of going to any more classes or continuing with this kind of networking, which there's nothing wrong with any of that, and sometimes it's crucial and it's very important, but what she did next was she moved inside and she started moving into quiet. She moved into reading things she hadn't taken time to read that were more reflective. She moved into kind of mapping out where she was and what she really wanted to have happen next. Not just get a job, but what she really wanted. And she ended up a few months later getting this job she never could have dreamed up, even in her most positive, moments.
Well, the same thing happened in my life.
Yeah.
You can't even dream of those possibilities becoming real. How much more proof does anyone need to see the severe limitations of the physical without the foundation of the spiritual? We are witnessing the collapse of capitalism, of the damage that it has done in creating this class warfare. I'll stop right there.
Right, because we said.
Right. I'm not going to talk about politics, although this is really about it's really more about the illusion and ignorance of the mind, but it's been an important part of the growth, not just of here in the United States, but as demonstrating to the entire world this other pole, or you could say dynamic or force, that is part of the spiritual realization. But we now, without the spiritual, all we see all around us is, you use the word dissolving, that it is melting away. And it's not that there's anything wrong with the physical. That's not it. It's about the absence or the poverty of the physical without the presence of the spiritual. So it's
funny because without the physical, we couldn't experience or expand or evolve, but without the spiritual, we can't do it either.
Well, it's obvious that all of us live in two worlds, and consequently, we have a tendency to practice two different forms of ourself, which is the self that you present to the outer world, the appearance, the mask that you wear, and the self that lies behind the mask, the one that is seeking to make itself known. The outcomes that any individual seeks in the beginning of their life are really only possibilities, but possibilities that become become potentials, and the potentials that can become a lived experience or truly actualized or realized in a physical body. At least that's what the individual is hoping to pull off and hoping to do. And that's what it's designed to do. The entire process is about the awakening, the realization of that truth. We are not trained in this country, in the United States, about the science of the becoming process, because the science of that process does not lie in a step-by-step, linear, sensory formula that the entire educational process is about. It lies within the invisible. Without the spiritual quadrant, the mind is doomed.
Well, it just runs in circles.
It cannot escape its own severe limitations and keeps repeating them.
And it runs in circles, the closed tape loop, because the horizontal, which the mind is entrenched in as part of, the horizontal has the multiplicity. It has all the events, the dramas, the circumstances, and of course all the people. There's all of this individualized energy and activity that resides, all of it, within the vertical, and the vertical is the one. So the variability...
So if we ask the question right there with what you said, I would ask anyone listening, which one are you? Are you the horizontal, physical, or are you the vertical, spiritual? You can't be both. So which one are you? You live in two worlds, the spiritual and the physical, but which one are you? You are the vertical spiritual in the process of realizing that in the physical world, that without the physical, you could not realize it.
And that's why I was thinking, well, in that way, we're both. It's like my friend that said that when everything's quiet at the end of the day and she gets still, that, and this gave me chills when she said it, that she can see herself in this lifetime, in this physical, in this form, as the one who is always, as the eternal. And so to be able to be the vertical one and see yourself then as everyone else too. This is the work, to be able to see that differentiation between your horizontal physical triangle self and the vertical, the one. So when we talk about the work, it's not like digging ditches.
Let me underscore, put in bold, in quotation marks, highlight what you just said, which is one of the defining characteristics of the future that is waiting on us is learning to see beyond the physical, to see the source, the reality, not only of ourselves, but of all others. Because if I am of God, then so are they. Mm-hmm. And learning to see that and organizing that truth and living out of it. So it's not about doing. It is about learning to truly see the truth.
To see, for example, that we are all the same. We are all one. At the same time, we're all individual and have our unique paths. And to be able to see those simultaneously, to me, that's the true essence of diversity. But also to be able to see us all as one, to train your mind to see within that kind of harmony, that diversity, that unity, in the truth that there is also division and separation, to see all of it as part of the one. And that's a whole lifetime.
The division, or the lack of unity, which is so obvious in the world in which we live today, is part of that evolutionary process by which it learns the truth of the need for unity and understanding of itself. So the one, whether you call that God, the divine, the absolute, whatever it is you want to call it, the one is the source of the multiplicity. But it does mean that you've learned to see. You see their path too, and their path is not the same as yours, that they are going about learning in the way that their soul has chosen. And that can bring you a great deal of peace and relief that continues to allow you as a human being to expand. There is no greater resource available to anyone than the work of the mother and Sri Aurobindo. I haven't said anything at all about Patrizia Norelli Bachelet. Perhaps we can look at that at another time. She would become known as Thea, and she is a person who met the mother and had spent, my understanding is, some time with her. But to go back to what you were saying, while we do reside in these two worlds, the horizontal, vertical, as you increase your consciousness, you become aware of your petty self. The one
little petty tyrant.
Yeah, the one that gets upset because your grilled cheese sandwich isn't hot enough. The petty self that's constantly seeking recognition and affirmation from others. And you know the one that I'm talking about. And what I'm saying about your petty, unconscious, miserable self is to be compassionate, is to love that part of you, to accept that part of you for the ignorance that it has practiced, because it just did not know. You just did not know. But the issue that we are all going to have in the future is we're getting ready to know. And now what are you going to do? Are you going to have the courage to rise above those addictive personality traits and start moving into the essence of your true being, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one spiritual realization at a time? And I'll say it again, there is no greater resource to find the answers to your life than the work of the mother and Sri Aurobindo.
Existence here has no justification unless there is one who exists. Just like joy has no reality unless there is one who is enjoying. Knowledge has no place in life unless there is someone who is knowing. And that's who you are. You are simultaneously existing, joy, enjoying, and knowledge, knowing. So as a Cliff's Notes bit of wisdom from the mother, I'll share this quote because it's a whole book in a single paragraph. Only one thing is absolutely indispensable: the will to discover and to realize. Whatever you do, whatever your occupations and activities, the will to find the truth of your being and to unite with it must be always living and present.
And of course, I'm not going to be outdone by letting you in with that quote. I want to share one of my own, and this, of course, comes from Savitri, Sri Aurobindo's masterpiece. And this is what these lines in this 800 epic poem say, and this is what it says. Is this enough, O Spirit? And what shall thy soul say when it wakes and knows the work was left undone for which it came? Or is this all for thy being born on earth, charged with a mandate from eternity, a listener to the voices of the years, a follower of the footprints of the gods, to pass and leave unchanged the old dusty laws? Shall there be no new tables, no new word, no greater light come down upon the earth, delivering her from her unconsciousness, man's spirit, from unalterable fate? Camest thou not down to open the doors of fate, the iron doors that seem forever closed, and lead man to truth's wide and golden road that runs through finite things to eternity? Is this then the report that I must make, my head bowed with shame before the Eternal's seat? His power he kindled in thy body has failed. His laborer returns, her task undone. And with that in mind, ask yourself, why am I here? What is the destiny of my life? And how will I fulfill the task that my soul has chosen in being here as a human being?
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. If this is something that piques your interest, certainly check out the works of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. And again, we would love to meet you in person and work with you here in Asheville or in Rhinebeck, New York at the Omega Institute. Details about all those opportunities can be found on our website at truthspringasheville.com.
Thank you so much.